Prior to beginning the activity, please be sure to review the faculty information and disclosure statements, as well as the learning objectives. After listening to the activity, complete the post-test by clicking the Earn Credit link in the episode description. Downloadable slides and resources are also available. The following presentation is copyrighted by Medscape. No use, broadcast, or recording of this presentation or any part thereof is permitted without the written authorization of Medscape.
The following presentation is part of a certified educational activity provided by Medscape Education and supported by an independent educational grant from Sandoz.
Off-label therapies have not been approved for the use specified in this activity. This information should not be considered as a recommendation for the use of a drug outside of the recommendations in the currently approved prescribing information.
Hello, I'm Benjamin Greenberg, Professor of Neurology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. Welcome to this program titled Best Practices in Patient Communication when Introducing Biosimilars into Multiple Sclerosis Care. We have a unique and special program for you. Joining me today are Michael Lyons, a patient and patient representative here in Dallas, and Crystal Wright, a nurse practitioner also from the Multiple Sclerosis Clinic at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center here in Dallas. Why are we talking about communication and biosimilars? We all know the importance of communicating effectively with our patients about any treatment options. We have generics and biosimilar options coming into play as the patents for original products expire. Some people with multiple sclerosis are undergoing a switch. Effective clinician-patient communication is essential around this topic to ensure people with MS know everything they need to know about these therapies. Let's talk about the elements of communication about any treatment, whether it's a new therapy being started or a change in an existing therapy. Crystal, in the course of a day, you spend a lot of time discussing treatments with patients. What are the most important elements of this discussion, or how do you frame this discussion with patients?
Well, as a nurse practitioner, we spend a lot of time discussing treatment options and changes in therapy. And with that, they want to know a lot of things about the medication. Is it safe? Is it effective? What can they expect from their therapy? How long has that medication been studied? And what kind of follow up there will be after they start the medication? And what we're looking for to measure their response.
And Michael, you're a patient who also provides support for other people with MS. In your personal experience and experience working with the community, what do you feel are the most important aspects when you have a conversation with your healthcare provider about the treatment being offered?
Truly, the most important thing is making sure that I, as a patient, am treated with respect. It doesn't mean that you have to give me every single step of the way of a treatment, but you do have to treat me like I am a person that is deserving of the information that's going to be there. Don't make it too hard to understand, and don't make it, too easy like I'm a fifth grader.
So, aside from the obvious benefits of having a well informed patient, as healthcare providers, we need to be aware that how we communicate may influence a patient's adherence, response to treatment, or even the adverse events that they experience, and so on. So, the three of us are going to discuss all of this in more detail, and we're going to use some clips of communication examples to highlight some key points in the context of biosimilars. But let's first take a look at the concept of biosimilars and generics. Many of you will be familiar with generics. For example, we have generics on the market for fingolimod, teriflunomide, even for glatiramer acetate. Generic drugs are usually chemically synthesized and are generally a copy of the original drug. The generic manufacturing process results in an active ingredient that is the same within each manufactured lot and between lots. We have new approvals for generics in multiple sclerosis, including cladribine, fumarates, and siponimod. So in the world of generics, most individuals, healthcare providers, and patients are aware of the concept of a generic. But biosimilars are different. So, biosimilars, on the other hand, are biologic drugs, which are large, complex molecules that range in size and complexity. And typically, these drugs are produced in living cells using recombinant DNA technology. We often refer to these as the monoclonal antibodies or biologics that we use in multiple sclerosis. And they include drugs like alemtuzumab, natalizumab, ocrelizumab, ofatumumab, and ublituximab. Any drug that ends in mab for monoclonal antibody was grown in a living cell. And as these drugs go off patent, we can now expect biosimilars. And in fact, there is now a biosimilar of natalizumab for relapsing forms of multiple sclerosis. So, Crystal, we have these biosimilars in neurology and other autoimmune disorders. What's been your experience with using them either in an on label or off label fashion?
So, the biosimilar for rituximab was originally used in oncology, and later we started seeing it used more for other conditions like myasthenia gravis. And there's actually a variety of biosimilar medications that we use for other neuroimmunological conditions as well, including um, infliximab.
It's interesting that you bring up the infliximab example because in the world of biosimilars, besides just our anecdotal experience and using in both on and off label, there have been prospective studies looking at comparing a biosimilar to the reference product or the original product. And the infliximab that you mentioned was studied in a large European study called NorSwitch, where they looked at individuals who had various autoimmune conditions, including rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and individuals were randomized to the reference product versus the biosimilar of infliximab. And they looked at both the efficacy and the safety over time. And the design of the study was to be a non inferiority study, basically to say that the biosimilar acted in the same way. And across the different disorders over a year long, there was no difference in safety or efficacy between the biosimilar or the original products. And so, overall, what was found in this study is that the patient experience clinically was the same, regardless of the agent that went on. And it really reinforced what we've seen anecdotally that when patients switch from a reference product to a biosimilar, in general, they have the exact same experience. And so these biosimilars have been used in a lot of diseases for many years in the United States and Europe, in oncology, which you mentioned, and rheumatology. And the question is, why do we need them? Why are biosimilars entering the market? If the reference product works, why would we need a biosimilar? And in the end, this is about healthcare savings. And as drugs are protected by a patent over many years, a single manufacturer working with either governments or insurance agencies can set the price. When the patent expires and a biosimilar makes it to the market, competition comes into effect and prices can come down. And in fact, in the world of biologics, which is one of the most expensive parts of the healthcare industry worldwide, the introduction of biosimilars is projected to save us over $180 billion, that's billion with a B, between 2023 and 2027. And whether we live in a part of the world with a national health insurance plan or in a part of the world with private insurers, bringing down healthcare costs is good for all of us as it increases access. But if you're a healthcare provider or a patient, you're going to have obvious questions because while money is important to the system, nothing's more important than an individual's experience with the drug and both their efficacy and safety. So now that we've covered the basics of biosimilars and the fact that there's biosimilars making it into the world of multiple sclerosis, this new reality is going to be invading our care rooms across the nation. And we need to know how to discuss biosimilars with patients. So, Michael, I'm going to start with you and ask if you have impressions about the MS patient community. And as we sit here today, how informed are they about biosimilars? If I were to take a poll about the difference between generics or biosimilars, do you think people would know what these are, or do you think there's an education gap that we need to fill?
You know what? That's a great question. And I do believe that there's an education gap. Right now, as I sit here listening to you just rattle off the names of these drugs without even skipping a beat, I think it's impressive. And I think that it's going to just like really point out the fact that as an MS patient, I don't necessarily pay so much attention to the drug as to the effects of it. And so you were talking about the safety and the efficacy. And of course, I want to make sure that those things are paramount in any of my discussions on it. The next thing is going to come to the place where we are talking about cost. So I would say that we are not as fully aware of these things as we could be and should be. And this is where communication from you guys comes into play. And I think that that's going to be great in helping us move forward, especially when we come to the place of cost, because that is something that all of us have to worry about.
Crystal, what about you? As you work in a healthcare team, and multiple sclerosis care has definitely become a team sport. It's no longer the very outdated model of a MD physician with a patient. We have an expansive team of nurse practitioners such as yourself, physician assistants, registered nurses, dietitians, speech pathologists, physical therapists, and our partners, our patients. As you think about that diverse group of nurses and various healthcare providers, what do you think the current sense of understanding about biosimilars is? And is there an education gap that we need to provide to the healthcare provider team so that we can communicate with our patients effectively?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think patients nowadays are more informed than ever thanks to the internet. And, sometimes people come in and they've found information and sometimes that affects the way they feel about a medication from the get go. If one of their friends had an experience that wasn't positive, they automatically come in with pre this idea that it's not going to work for them because it didn't work for their friend. And so I think that healthcare providers need to know these medications backwards and forwards. They need to know the safety, they need to know the efficacy of them, and they need to be comfortable to talk about them because our patients, they're smart and they know a lot about these drugs to begin with. And they want to make sure that we are comfortable with them. And if we come off as not being comfortable or not being knowledgeable about medication, it's going to make them very hesitant to consider that in the first place. And so I think, the patients and the healthcare providers, um, we all want to know that these medications are safe, that they're effective, they're well tolerated. And I think the more we know and the more that the patients know, the better the treatment's going to go in the long run.
And so when you talk about our educated patient population, it's exploding in terms of access to resources, which is only a good thing. But it's interesting listening to both of you, despite technology and the changes in healthcare and the teams. In the end, this really is an interpersonal relationship event, and it's not just the words we use, but how we say them that really drive either confidence or not in that healthcare exchange. And so when we talk about the notion of biosimilars, it's not just a matter of content, and we're going to talk about content some, but it's also about communication style. So, Michael, when you think about the words and communication style of a healthcare provider and its impact on a person's experience with treatment, what are some of the stylistic things that you find to be impactful or important for the patient experience?
You know what? I think that the style of the delivery of the message is truly important. Um, there are absolutely going to be places where I want to know that my healthcare provider is educated about this. I want to know that they are confident in the item that they are prescribing me to take, whether they are going to let me go on with what I've been doing or move me to something else. I need to know that they are not just putting something out there that is kind of rolled across their desk and they haven't done any research on. And so I truly want to make sure that this person whose life I'm putting my hands in is going to give me the best options available. And then, also, I just want to know that they're not just blowing smoke. Um, it's really important because again, these are the things that are affecting my daily life. And so the confidence that a person has in this is great, and then the actual words when they line up. If you say that people are going to look to find out information, they're going to want to know that, hey, that doctor is saying things in the same way. And if there's not an alignment in that, they're going to try to figure out what's the difference in there. And unfortunately, some people are going to trust the internet much more than they trust our healthcare providers if they don't see that those things are accurate. So I'm not saying that you guys need to be lined up because I don't believe the internet exactly. Uh, but I do want to know that, hey, you know what? You might know the downsides where people are talking about these arguments, where people are saying, hey, you know what? It hasn't worked for, these other three people here. Well, yeah, again, everybody that has MS is not the same. And that's one thing that I learned over time. And we could have 1,000 people with MS lined up right next to each other. Not all of us are going to have the same experience, and not all of us are going to have the same reactions to these things. And that's something that I think really needs to come across in the message.
Well, you really highlight the fact that while we deal with a population of individuals in the room, it's always an individual of one that we're focused on. And I know, Crystal, you've had a lot of experience talking with patients over the years about different therapeutics and about interventions. And as Michael mentioned, these are big decisions for people to make that can carry a lot of stress and a lot of weight. And I think it's fair to say, as healthcare providers, we've learned over time that we can provide the exact same information in different ways and have it land very differently with our patients. So I'm curious about your personal thoughts and experience and communication style relative to the patient experience.
Yeah, so like you said, and we've mentioned before, the way that we come across to patients, the way we communicate information to them matters. If I tell you, well, this is new and I'm not really sure how you'll do, they're not going to have confidence in this medication, and it's going to affect whether or not they're compliant. And it's probably going to affect how they feel on that medication. So there's something called the nocebo effect, which is basically opposite of the placebo effect. And it's basically a negative response caused by these prior thoughts or, um, you know, other people's expectations, having negative expectations of something, you're more likely to have negative response. And so I think how we present this is very important. If I tell someone, "Well, I don't know, maybe you might have this or that, or you might do well. Um, Chances are they're looking at me, they're listening, and they're saying, "Oh, well, I don't know if I should take this. Maybe I should skip out on that dose because I don't want to have what she said," or things like that. So we need to be clear and concise and speak to patients with confidence about what we know about these medications, so that they feel more comfortable with their decision.
And what's critical there, and I really appreciate your commentary, is the fact that it is fine to say to patients, "We don't know," when we don't know, and we should always be transparent and not blow smoke, as Michael says, and be forthright. But there is a difference between not knowing because it's unknown to the world versus not knowing because we aren't up to date. And one of the concerns that comes up in the world of biosimilars and generic medications is the education gap we've been talking about. And hopefully, with our conversation today, what we're going to do is make you, the listener, feel more comfortable with biosimilars so you can walk into the room confidently and discuss what a biosimilar is and isn't, and not have to induce a nocebo effect. But in order to explore this, we thought it'd be fun to do it in more detail. And what we'd like to do is do a communication clip with an example of how to communicate in one fashion, and then flip the script and do it in another fashion so you, the listener, can see the difference between the two. So let's begin with the first. At some point, you're going to be taken off natalizumab and put on a biosimilar. It's basically a cheaper copy of the drug, like a generic. This could happen at any time, but it's nothing to worry about. I just want you to be aware. So, Michael, what do you think about this example of communication? It was factually correct. There wasn't any misinformation there. But as a patient and as a support group leader and a community advocate, how does this land with you? What are the words or the style that are good or bad, and why?
First off, Doc, I'd like to say thank you for getting to the point. Um, but it also feels like it's something that is a bit rushed as we kind of go through this. Um, I'd like to feel as a patient talking to my healthcare provider that I understand that you guys are going to take the time to make sure that I truly understand this. And you did say that there was nothing to worry about. I don't feel that that was exactly communicated to me that there's nothing to worry about. That wasn't something that I got from this. You lack specificity in this. You said, hey, at any time, I don't know when you're going to transfer me off of this to the next drug. You're saying taken off. Like, okay, so what does that really mean for me? And then cheaper. Honestly, I don't want my health care to just be cheapened. I need my experience to be better. And it doesn't matter just that it is less expensive or um, doesn't cost so much. It can be cheaper because it's not as effective. And so those are things that I truly need to get from your message to me.
Great. And Crystal, as you listened to me give that delivery, what was your impression? And you spoke about a nocebo effect. Were there any words I used or approaches I used that you think could put an individual at risk for experiencing a nocebo effect?
Yeah, so using cheaper copy, when you hear that, you automatically think, well, like he said, something less effective, something inferior. Um, and also with biosimilars, the word copy maybe isn't accurate because it is a biosimilar. It's similar, but not the exact copy. And so you want to use words that are clear, but also accurate when you're describing these terms. And then, like a generic, again, just making sure that we're being clear that there's a difference between generics and biosimilars. So with speaking of that, with studies, there is the infliximab biosimilar study, the BioSwitch trial, which was done in the Netherlands, and it was 192 patients with RA, psoriatic arthritis, and ankylosing spondylitis, who switched over to a biosimilar from the originator drug. And 24% of those patients discontinued the biosimilar after about 6 months of treatment. And the reason for discontinuation was subjective reasons, so not objective things that could be measured. And this was thought to be partly from the nocebo effect and these ideas that they had going into it that it wasn't going to be the same.
So when we take the data from the Switch study, where clinically and objectively patients on either drug did the same, both in terms of safety, efficacy, and tolerability, in this study, the BioSwitch trial, that 24% number really suggests that a patient's expectations plays a role in whether they stay on the drug. And so you each bring up great points about the parts of my delivery style in that clip that may lead people astray. And Michael, you mentioned that it was somewhat short and to the point, and while we all appreciate brevity, if you had to give specific advice to practitioners listening to this about missing information, what would be important to you as a patient to include in the conversation about the biosimilar?
Doc, I want you to know, again, you got straight to the point. I value your time, and I know there are a lot of people that are out there that are waiting to talk to you and hear things. So this is what I really need to get. I need to understand what a biosimilar is, right? There are generics and there are biosimilars. I know some names of things, but I don't know exactly what all of those things mean. And I need to get that explanation from you guys. I need to know that you guys are really going to reassure me about these things being effective and they're being safe. Let me know how these things are approved. So we have all the agencies out there, and hey, if these things run through them and they go through the same vigorous testing, then that's going to be a great thing for me. And then I need to know how I'm supposed to move on these things. So there are things that happen out there to me, and there are things that I have an effect on. So, how is this going to happen to me? What is it that I need to do along the way? How are you guys going to check on it to make sure that I am having the desired outcomes from this? And what else needs to be done?
So those are all great points, and I don't take any of the feedback personally. That clip was meant to be illustrative of one communication style, but now it's time to take a look at another communication approach and compare them.
We know you've had a good response to your current therapy. We want you to know that a biosimilar of this treatment is now available. In concept, it is like a generic, but because your treatment is a biologic, this means it is produced in living cells. The biosimilar is made from the same process and provides the same treatment benefits as the original medication. The biosimilar has also been tested according to the FDA standards and approved by the FDA. We have many years of experience with biosimilars in other autoimmune disorders and other diseases. Now we have one for your MS therapy, and many people with MS are switching to it. Your monitoring and follow up will remain the same, but we will also monitor you during the switch. We will be here for you if you have any questions or concerns, and we will provide you with some handouts with more information. Do you have any questions for me now?
So, Michael, that was very different than the first communication style. I'm going to start with you and ask, was this better? And if so, how? What stood out to you?
Uh, Sorry, Doc. Again, nothing against your first explanation. I think that it was great. I'm just going to go ahead and say that, you know what, this said that it was explained and it was tested. It was approved. It was mentioned by the FDA. It was mentioned that many people with MS have this and they're switching to those. Um, I would like to know that it's not something where you're just switching me, Mike, to this, but everybody has been on it. Also, it said that they've been out there for a while. So this is not necessarily something new, even though it might be new to the treatment that I am having. This is something that has been done across many different um, things for a long time. And I think that sometimes the handouts are helpful. On occasion, I will read them, especially when I have questions. But I definitely like being able to use you guys as resources and you guys being available to be able to answer those questions for me with confidence and with the information that backs it up makes me feel so much better.
Dr. Greenberg, when we talk about that second clip, can you tell me why you think that clip may have been a little better?
Well, it wasn't just better because you were the one doing it versus me. It was better in every way. First, in terms of the words that were used and the information that was provided. You explained what a biosimilar was. You explained that it was produced in a living cell. You explained the fact that it gets tested through regulatory agencies, that a patient can expect the same monitoring and follow up. You offered to provide additional information through handouts. But what's also important was the nonverbal communication. And importantly, while I was brief and to the point and factually correct, spending too little time can come across as not invested, not interested, or not educated. If our listeners were to go back and time the two deliveries, I would argue that it was actually only a marginally longer amount of time in the scheme of things. This was not a 20-minute explanation. But the extra 45 to 60 seconds that you spent in proactively addressing patient concerns goes a long way to build confidence from those who are listening to you. And importantly, you added information juxtaposing a biosimilar to a generic. And you remembered the fact that this vocabulary is new to all of us. And it is inappropriate for us to lump these drugs as generics because it raises concern amongst our patients and amongst healthcare providers. And if I had to end, you did a great job of inviting the patient to ask questions versus just prescribing. So, for all of those reasons, I think you did an outstanding job, a better job than the first clip, and likely will have a much better impact on the patient experience, both psychologically and medically, through that explanation. So, Michael, as you think about patients and what they want to know, and you're thinking about the answers that were given, what might a patient ask in this situation? So, if you're in the room with Crystal or myself, and you get that good explanation, what can healthcare providers anticipate you asking them at the end of the conversation?
I think what you could really anticipate me asking is, will I have the same regular test and will I go for my same monthly infusion as usual? Right. So if things are working well for me, as Crystal said, is anything really going to change for what it is that I have to do?
And then, Crystal, if you get that question, how do you answer it?
Yes, we will do the same testing that we would do with the patient on the original drug. We would do the MRIs regularly, JC virus testing regularly, lab monitoring, and you'll have safety monitoring with your infusion just as you would any other time. And the packaging may be different, but the medication itself is very similar, and we're going to monitor it the same way we would with an original medication. We're going to discuss possible side effects. We're going to monitor for those side effects. And if any of those things occur, we're going to treat you the same way and make sure that we work together to remedy the problem.
And importantly, as we have those conversations, I always look for opportunities to reinforce the core concept that Crystal was providing in that clip number 2, which is the medical equivalence of biosimilars in the reference products. And it's important for us to educate ourselves and our patients that this reference product equivalence doesn't just talk about efficacy, it also refers to risks. So, in the setting of natalizumab, for example, where the reference product has a label warning of the risk of PML, the biosimilar has the same warning. And so it's important for patients to understand that their experience with the drug will naturally be the same. So when we talk about the large concept of biosimilars and generics, it's not just the patient experience from a pragmatic perspective, what's going to happen with labs or what's going to happen with visits. In our healthcare system, there are always other questions about process. And Michael, you had picked up on the first clip where I just said, at some point this is going to happen. And I was very terse in my answer. Is that a big question that you think patients will ask when they come to a visit and they're sitting with me or Crystal and I say, At some point your infusion center may adopt a new drug. Is this going to cause concern and how should we address it?
Absolutely. I want to know when and where will this change happen. Also, I want to know what happens if I don't want to go on the biosimilar.
And so I think it's important for us, Crystal, as we work with patients to talk about options. And in our healthcare system, unfortunately, sometimes those options are limited due to formularies or what insurance companies say, or if you're in a nationalized health insurance system, what the government says. And sometimes our choices are restricted. And so I think it's important for patients to know that while we can advocate for patient choice, sometimes we have limited choices. And at least what I try to do is reassure patients about that medical equivalence between the two, that the risk of the change is limited. And importantly, as you mentioned in clip 2, these drugs have been prospectively studied in trials. Crystal, do you find that there is a certain important piece of information to help the patients who are reluctant or concerned about a switch that they may not have control over that you can provide reassurance with?
I think sometimes just sharing your experience using those biosimilar medications helps the patient feel at ease. If you're able to give an example of, I have other patients on this medication and they're doing well, the switch went well, and they haven't had anything drastic or big changes, it reassures them that they're not alone and that other patients are doing it. And I think that they have faith in you. They've been coming to see you for years and they trust you. And so if you can make them feel more comfortable with the decision or the switch, I think they're going to do better as well because they're going to go in there with, okay, my provider has used this medication, they're comfortable with it, so I'm also comfortable with this change.
I think that's a great point. And one of the things I have found anecdotally in my clinical practice is a little bit of education goes a long way. I think a lot of not just patients, but healthcare providers come to the concept of biosimilars and they substitute generics. And I find that if I spend a moment explaining the FDA standards for interchangeability, it goes a long way. So I remind patients that you may have heard of generics and you may have had bad experiences when you had a name brand drug switch to a generic and felt it didn't work the same for you. But a biosimilar is different. Not only do they have to seek approval from the FDA showing that they were manufactured in an appropriate fashion, but they actually have to do a clinical trial showing that they get the same clinical result as the reference product. Generics don't have to do that. So the efficacy and the risk are truly interchangeable between the two. And so, as you put this all together and you're thinking about educating our listeners about communication, Crystal, do you have any additional advice for nurses and healthcare providers out there about how they can avoid that nocebo effect that you referenced?
First of all, just pay attention to the nonverbal communication. Um, our facial expressions can be very readable, And so you want to make sure that when you give the information, um, again, you know this information, be comfortable with it, avoid making weird faces or you know, things like that that might affect how the patient is going to perceive what you're telling them. You want to reassure them that these biosimilars are effective, they are safe, they are studied, they go through the same rigorous procedure that the original drug goes through the FDA, and you want to provide specific information about what they're going to expect during that change, and then ensure patients that they do understand um, what you're talking. Maybe ask if they have questions, see what their concerns are, and address those specifically. I always like to ask patients, after we go over, the 15 different medications, um, and we decide on one or two and they seem a little reluctant, I like to ask, why are you a little reluctant? Do you have a fear? Tell me about it. And maybe after hearing that, I can help educate them a little bit better on that specific fear and what that really looks like in our world, and how often we see that. Is that fear something that's on the label, but something we haven't actually seen in clinical practice, or things that we don't see very often? And I think that that reassures them and helps put their fear at ease from the very beginning. And that can make a big difference.
So, when I think about this discussion, it's been great working with both of you. I hope our listeners have really taken away from this that there are informational aspects about the discussions of biosimilars that are critical to include. Importantly, how they're different than generics. Also, how information is conveyed goes a long way. So, you want to remember what is a biosimilar, that it's a biologic medication, that it's highly similar to and has no clinically meaningful difference from a reference product. And when it's compared to a reference product, they're made in the same types of cells, it's the same route of administration, it's the same strength, the same dose, and there is no difference that can be measured in terms of quality, safety, or efficacy. And as you communicate this with your patients, you can do so with confidence, and how you communicate it can go a long way in your patients having a positive experience. So, Crystal, Michael, I want to thank you both for this timely and important conversation. I want to thank you, the listener, for participating in this activity. Please continue on to answer the questions that follow and complete the evaluation.